This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I am your host, Steve Anderson, and today we have two guests, MALITTA SEAMON and Brad SEAMON. MALITTA is a business strategist, coach, author, speaker, and trusted advisor to CEOs, C-suite executives, and leaders. After over 25 years of running a multi-million-dollar event services firm she built with husband Brad, she co-founded Inbound Leadership to help unlock untapped potential for greater impact by fostering safe spaces for leaders to reflect, to be vulnerable, and to grow. She is a certified executive coach, a relationship coach, a nutritionist, a certified disc coach, and a trained breathwork practitioner, and has served on several nonprofit boards. And Brad is a healthcare executive dedicated to aligning community health needs with the priorities of government officials, lawmakers, and the healthcare system he serves. Passionate about leadership, development, coaching, and empowering others, he is the co-founder, consultant, and board member at Inboard Leadership. He has guest lectured at college-level courses, shares thought leadership, and gives talks and writes articles primarily focused on mindset and personal transformation. In addition, Brad is a certified public accountant, certified professional coach, and a certified DISC and emotional intelligence coach. MALITTA and Brad have been married for 37 years and reside in Maryland. They have two sons, Brad Jr. and Chad, a daughter-in-law, Danielle, and two granddaughters, Parker and Kendall. So welcome to the program, you two. It's really great to have you on today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Great to be here.
So give us a little context here. We know from the bio you've been married for 37 years, which is great. So just kind of tell us maybe how you met and where you grew up, and then we'll jump into the business things.
Interesting. So I'll take the lead here. So I'm originally from Washington, D.C. Brad is from Philadelphia and came to Washington to attend Howard University. And he eventually became roommates with my sister, who is now my sister's husband. And that's how we met. So
Great.
he and my brother-in-law married sisters. And that's how the story began.
Yeah.
Actually, 38 years ago now.
That's great. That's great. And the business that you put together when you first started was in Maryland, which is I would assume just a suburb of DC, kind of in that area.
That's correct. It was in Maryland. We started in a very, well, actually, the original business started in our home in Maryland, and then we eventually moved to a very small office that we shared and grew it basically from nothing. If you had a chance to read the Mindset Freedom, our book, we tell the story how we really scraped to start the business, and it took about 3 years for us to get to the point where we weren't running from bill collectors and car repossessors. So it was quite a story.
Yes, that for those that are watching the video, here is the book, Mindset Freedom, which is fascinating, and I'm very you two were brave. I mean, you were very vulnerable. You put it all out there. You talked about some real struggles you had both in the business and the marriage, and I was impressed that it was as vulnerable as it was.
Yeah. So, Steve, I think when we really sat down to start writing the book, the reason why we did it was that we learned so much from the experience of starting the business together. And then when I left the business and the impact that had on the business and on our marriage, that we thought that we wanted to share the lessons that we learned. And we knew that the only way that we could do it effectively, and with credibility, was to be vulnerable and authentic. And that's really what we set out to do.
Yeah, it's a really good book. Well done. And the way the book is set up is Melita kind of starts and tells the story from her perspective, and then Brad, you come in and share your perspective, and then tie it all together. So it's well done.
Thank you.
I'm intrigued that, so for those who haven't read the book, you start this business and it starts out to be uh, I mean, tell us about what is it, like a fractional CFO type of business where you helped federal government agencies with their finances? Is that correct?
That is what we tried to do. So we were able to land our initial contract doing that, and we thought that made sense. Brad was a CPA. I had a background in marketing. So it made sense for us to pull those two things together and say, hey, let's go pitch our services. We started off in the private sector and discovered the federal government and said, hey, this could be a good place for us to build a foundation. But we quickly learned that it was difficult to compete against the big guys. We were just a two-person operation, and rightfully so, the federal government was not going to entrust large audits or financial responsibilities to our shop. But we were able to do some work in that area. And eventually we discovered a niche in the area of event planning, which was not something either of us had a background doing, but we were perfectly willing to learn because we felt that we could compete within that arena and do well. And that's how we really built our business.
Yeah, so and it grew. You got more contracts and did more event planning and so on. And so you're going out, 3, 4 years doing great. And then, as you describe in the book, which again was very candid, basically you were both co-founders. You were both like co-CEOs in a way. But Melita, you kind of felt like Brad was getting all the accolades as the CEO, and you were doing all the other work, and didn't sit well.
That's right. So it's really interesting because one of the things that Brad and I really discovered once we were able to get beyond the frustration, the anger, and the resentment that actually built as we were building the company and experiencing success is that I had what we refer to now as sort of an underactivated ego, and Brad had an overactivated ego. So together, those things eventually clashed because I had ideas, I just did not have the confidence that Brad had. And so I was willing to take a back seat, but I became resentful about it and I was not communicating about it. And Brad, having an overactivated ego, enjoyed the spotlight, the shine, and the accolades. And so we eventually ran into some issues, very serious issues around that.
And then Brad, were you aware of that when you were living that part of it? Because it sounded like in the book you were like in hog heaven. This is great and everything's going fine, and then all of a sudden you realized it's not going fine.
Yeah. So it's funny, Steve. You mentioned the word aware, and that is foundational to our story and to the book, because the fact is that I was not aware at the time that I had this ego that was a bit overactivated, as we've dubbed it. And I thought, as I said in the book, I was a humble person. I thought my parents, taught me that everybody is important and deserves to be treated with respect, and it doesn't matter what your title is or what kind of job you have or how much money is in your bank account, that it is important to treat people with respect. And so I always did that. But the other side of it too was that I had a real thirst for knowledge. I'd like to learn. I talked about that in the book as well. But that, that began to make me believe that I knew and understood things that other people didn't. In fact, Melita and I would clash over things because she's very intuitive, and again, I'm more, sort of knowledge based. And when we would try to make business decisions, and I'm basing it on, something I've read or some data or what have you, and Melita's was more intuitive, that would cause a challenge. And so, no, I was not aware of it. And in fact, ego was the thing that led me to leave the business And it wasn't until after, after that, that Melita really became my mirror and showed me the error in my ego-based ways.
It's impressive that I've always thought it's tough for married couples to live together and work together in the same company, and you did that very closely. And so it's not surprising, I guess, in a way that you did have some struggles. One affects the other. You can't keep it separate, that's for sure. So going back to the ego thing, it's interesting. In the book you talk about how we all have egos, and they're just in different ways, but you describe them too as on a spectrum. So it sounds like maybe you two were at both ends of the ends of the spectrum
Yeah.
in a different way. So
Right. That's right. I, in the course of writing the book, I discovered some things about myself, or I just went into deeper memories to really connect with the fact that I suffered from low self-esteem, and I was not aware of that. So, as I mentioned before, it was easy for me to sit back, step back, because I was not comfortable in the limelight, And what happened was, as Brad described, I rely on my intuition and data, and he, in that order, and he does it in reverse. And
yeah,
so we were very much at odds. And so sometimes when Brad would challenge me with, okay, I need you to give me the data or the research or verify, and sometimes I was not able to do that. That only made my esteem worse, because I was not able to have the confidence to step up, and I wouldn't take, swings at the ball like I should have. So it really exaggerated the gap between our roles and the way things appeared in the business, as I talk about in the book. More and more as the years went on, Brad looked more like the CEO. And as we grew from the two-person shop to the 130, 50 people that we had, the optics did very much support the fact that Brad was the CEO and I was, quote unquote, his wife in the business.
in a perfect world, having that diversity on the spectrum, so to speak, could be an advantage. But it seems, when you're married and you take it home and you're living with it, that's a whole different level. I can see. So after a while, Melita, you just decided, as the story goes, that you know what, I've had enough. I'm not feeling it. This is too frustrating. I don't feel, appreciated or purposeful or whatever you want to call it. And you left the company and decided to do something different. And so you hired a COO, and that didn't go well to basically replace you. So from a leadership perspective, I'm interested. What was that COO not able to do? What happened and why? And you eventually had to come back into the company to save it.
Yes. So that's an interesting question to focus on. In hindsight, we hired someone with the skills, but he did not have the makeup, the character, the traits that we needed in our organization. The company had been built around Brad and myself. So, we knew it inside out. We worked together. We didn't always see things eye to eye, but we knew how to work together, and we weren't in competition with one another. So in comes the COO, who I believe felt a need to prove to the team, to the staff, that he had certain knowledge, certain authority. And unfortunately, in doing so, he broke down the trust. And so the staff did not trust him, did not trust that his authenticity. And so with that, he began to fail because people were not following his lead. We had turnover. Clients did not trust his word either. And so it really tarnished our reputation. We had built a reputation on being very trustworthy. It was part of our guiding principles. And so it really took us a bit to recover from the mistake that we made. And we made the mistake because I was anxious to get out, and I frankly think Brad was anxious for me to get out. So
Well, it just shows how important those hires are. So as you go forward now, Brad, with uh, the business and now with your coaching and so on, what did you learn from that experience? What mistakes do you think that you made as a leader with bringing that person on?
Yeah, it's funny we mentioned the word ego. I think there was an ego challenge for that individual that we brought in as well, and Melita kind of described what the byproduct of that is, and what I've learned from my own experience watching that and watching other leaders as well is that your ego and you're on this continuum, it can really get you in trouble. I mean, if you are a person that has, a more overactivated ego, wants to be the one who knows, wants to be the one who's in control. It creates an environment that is not as collaborative. And one really, really big thing, Steve, is that when you have a big ego and people can see it, and they always can, it causes them to not tell you the truth. They don't give you honest and real feedback. And so what ends up happening is that you operate, um, with a blind spot. And in fact, the 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 blind spot that that I had is the thing that Melita pointed out to me, and when she became my mirror, and once I was able to see that blind spot, then I was able to deal with it and address it. So I think, as my lesson from that as a leader is self-awareness. You really have to be self-aware so that you can, manage your own ability to manage yourself as well as make others feel comfortable and create an environment where people are psychologically safe.
Melita, when you were out of the company, you weren't sitting around. You put together a nonprofit and were doing great things, and so that must have been hard to give that up to come back. But when you did come back, did you feel like you wanted to come back and help the company, or was it kind of a feeling I just I have to do this, but I don't want to do it? Because it wasn't too long where you kind of that feeling came back of that unfulfilled feeling again. So what what should you have done differently that perhaps you on the backside you can see now?
So looking back, I definitely should have paused and not gone back without a plan. I went back without a plan. Brad and I did not discuss what it would look like when I returned. And so I didn't go back with the expectation of hiring a new replacement. I went back sort of to save the day, so to speak. And so, fear is a strange beast. I, feared for the company. I feared for our stability. I did not want to lose any more clients, so I just jumped in without thinking.
And what came through in the book loud and clear was that even at times where they're really tough and you're struggling, you always have a choice.
Right.
Sometimes we feel like we don't have a choice. We just have to keep going and we have to do things. But you say in the book that you always have a choice.
That's right. I was really great at creating imaginary jails and complaining about my conditions and not doing anything about it. So it was one of the biggest lessons that I learned through the journey, through the experience that got us through to where we are, is to pause and ask myself what it is that I really want and what do I choose based on that desire. And that's what I did not do when I returned to the business.
It must have been a tough time as well. I mean, you come back and things are going better because you did come in and kind of save it as you will. But you weren't happy. You still didn't find that purpose in your life. You still had the pain and things that are going on. So that must have been hard on the marriage as well as the business.
Absolutely. So we, as I mentioned, we did not address the real issue. We addressed the crises, but we did not address the issue. So I returned, and eventually the fundamental issue came to light once again. And I was left with the same sense of unfulfillment and resentment as well. And that eventually, not to, tell too much of the story ahead of time, but that's eventually, I think, what impacted Brad and what eventually happened.
Yeah, and as the story goes, now Brad says, I'm out. He's going to leave the business and go do something else. So, Brad, tell us what brought you to that.
Yeah. So we were at a pivotal point in the development of the business, which made it more of a bad time for me to leave. But we were federal government contractors, and the contracting rules stated, after you get to a certain level of revenue in a certain um, industry or market area, you have to transition out of that. So we were at a point where we had to transition out of doing the conferences and events, and we decided to transition into information technology. And so I took the lead on doing the business development to develop the relationships and identify opportunities. We hired some staff to work with me, and my results were mixed. Melita was upfront in pointing that out to me, that she thought that some of the people that we brought in weren't the best people to bring in, and that maybe they were not being managed and led the right way. And so again, my ego got in the way, and I was sort of living from the outside in, so I felt like people could see that I was not doing the best job of leading us through that transition. And so it caused both fear, as Melita said, and then some level of frustration as well. So when the opportunity came along for me to leave, I took it, and I told myself at the time that it was best to actually have Melita lead us through that transition. But in fact, what it was is that my ego had gotten in the way and caused me to make a bad decision.
Yeah, so interesting. One of the lines that I pulled out of the book that I thought was impactful was that you said, sometimes we know and um, what to do, but we don't do it. We don't, it's like we know what to do, but then we don't do it. So uh, that seems weird, right? If we know we need to do this, why don't we just do it? Ego comes in.
Sometimes it's just too difficult, you know. And Brad mentioned it, and I've said it a few times. There was a lot of fear floating around. Fear related to the direction of the company, fear related to um, our marriage, and the difficulties that we were having as we were trying to navigate through this shift. Fear that we this reputation we built, we both had ego skin in the game, and so we had this reputation. So we were reacting and not responding in some cases, because we would do the things that were either easier to do or might look a certain way versus really fixing the real problem.
I think brain
Yeah,
science
and
is.
I think
Go ahead, Brad.
I was going to say, I think it's important to mention there too that is the word mindset. It's in the title of the book. What sometimes gets in the way of, you might know the right thing to do, but you don't do it, is your mindset. And Melita talked about an imaginary jail earlier. Well, one of the things that we talk about in the book is we talk about our Prove It mind shift methodology. And on the left side of the Prove It methodology is what we really call a mindset prison, where we are locked up and blocked by certain obstacles. It could be ego, it could be fear, as Melita mentioned, that get in the way of us actually doing the right thing. And in that case, you need mindset freedom in order to do that. And this whole experience that we went through, Steve, of getting knocked down, taught us how to make that mind shift from the mindset prison to one more mindset freedom, where you're more open-minded and open to the opportunities that come your way, and quickly assessing them and taking advantage of them or putting them to the side.
You know, brain science shows us that we try and get comfortable. Like, you know, everyone wants to be comfortable in life. And you also said in the book that, you know, sometimes you just have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable because
Yeah.
it's, you know, as we all know, we do greater things and accomplish bigger goals when we're in that area of being uncomfortable. Yet it's not the go-to. It's not the fallback. It's not something that, you know, most people want to do. So another mindset is just the fact to realize that we can't always be comfortable. Sometimes we just have to accept the fact that things are uncomfortable.
That's right. And one of the things that we discovered is how significant pain is. You know, pain is an invitation that something needs to either be reevaluated, um, reestablished or eliminated, or, a change needs to happen. So pain doesn't show up. And pain is, I associate pain with discomfort. It doesn't show up without purpose. And our responsibility is to pause and answer the question, what does this mean? And what
And
is it here to teach me?
And
go ahead, Brad.
yeah, and Steve, oftentimes what we find is that our pain is rooted in things and experiences that we've had in the past. That, they may be experiences that, are that we buried, and they're kind of in our unconscious. And what we have to do is become aware of those things. Again, getting back to awareness, so that we can move ourselves into the present to deal with, making conscious decisions based on what we know in the present, as opposed to being impacted and driven by experiences that may have happened to us all the way back to when we were a child. So when we talk about prove it, and the P stands for from pain to presence, that's the kind of mind shift that we had to make in order to get more of what we wanted.
And you came up with the prove it methodology, which prove it, each letter of those two words stands for something. And you just said the P is for pain to presence. Um, so the acronym, you know, lays out all the other pieces of it from, you know, ego to, I think an important one too in the book too is victim to valor. You know, how do you get there? It's to play that victim role doesn't do you or the people around you any good, but it's easy to fall into
And I was great at it.
that. Yeah. So, Brad, you also talk about in the book too that in your section about being humble in your aspirations, gracious in the successes, and resiliency over failure, because we're all going to fail at some things, and being resilient to that and not let the ego get in the way is a big part of that.
Yeah, and that's a quote from a book, "Ego is the Enemy," by Ryan Holiday. And I was always tell Melita, I was in Barnes and Noble one day, and it was like I walked down the aisle, and it was almost like that book jumped off of the shelf and jumped into my hands. And when I saw it, that particular line, it became a mantra for me to remember to stay present when we're having success. Never get too high, but also never get too low. And things will not always go the way that you want them to go, but when you stand back up, always stand up stronger than you were when you got knocked down. And that is the resilience piece of it as well.
And another part there too that I thought was interesting when you talk about how fear causes inaction while ego causes wrong action sometimes. So, you know, a lot of people say, well, just, you know, move forward and do something and make something happen. but sometimes the ego can make you do the wrong thing, which is probably as destructive as not doing anything.
Yeah. So Melita and I talk a lot, probably every other day about what we call the ally and the bully. And the ally is that voice in your head that's giving you positive feedback, um, giving you good energy, um, giving you confidence. And then the bully is the one that's loud, always chattering. Sometimes we call it the chatterbox, and it's giving you negative energy. It's draining you, and there is the awareness that this goes on is very important to being able to manage yourself so that you can really tell the bully to sit down and more listen to what it is that the ally is saying to you.
So I know that both of you are certified and teach in the DISC profile system, which I do as well. So Melita, did you know that personality type and how to talk with those personality types when you were going through all this, or is it something you learned later that could have been useful then?
So it's interesting because we were introduced to DISC years ago when we were running the business together, and both had the assessments done and attempted to apply DISC within our organization. But through the crisis, through the journey on the other side, we re-engaged with it, and it was like an entirely new understanding because of everything that we've been through and having more self-awareness. So I think when we originally were introduced to DISC, honestly, I think for me, it was more about showing Brad about himself than it
Yeah.
was about learning about myself. I knew and I stood, but I gravitated more to what was good than what I needed to improve on. So I wasn't able to connect with that. But as we learned, became more self-aware, I could really connect with the assessment and some of the things that were evident by the outcomes of my DISC.
One of the things that I think is so effective in that in using the disc profiles and so on is learning what language to use when you're talking to somebody and you know their personality type. Because if I talk to them in my language, the language that resonates with me, it may not resonate with them. They don't hear it, it goes right over their head. They don't know what you're talking about. So in all the struggles that you had during that time, whether it was disc or not, I'm sure you learned how to use language that was effective without being destructive.
And one thing I'll add
Yeah.
to that, Steve, is interesting. I'm sorry, Brad, if I cut you off. Is,
No.
and I alluded to this, is using DISC in a positive, powerful way, right? So we don't want to, and we run into this, and I'm sure you do as well. Sometimes with clients, they want to gravitate towards the things that they weren't able to honestly communicate, maybe with a coworker or even a manager or a boss. And the DISC is a way to get that across, but not necessarily focusing on the power behind the strategies and how to communicate with that work style, with that behavior type. And so I think what you're saying is extremely important. We did not have that. Um, we weren't in that paradigm originally, but we learned to understand, appreciate, and respect the power of the information that the DISC assessment provides.
Mhm. Brad, did you want to add something to that?
That Melita and I, in terms of disc, we used it a lot with companies as we went into a company and did the disc training with the executive team, and then they decided to do it across all 100 employees, and they took the summary of the disc assessments and created an online repository where you could go on and find your coworkers so that, if you were going to have a meeting with somebody, you could look at their disc and it would help you to your point, choose certain words, and communication techniques to make it easier to communicate. So, and Melita and I did it with each other. Melita was a high D, high I. I was a high I, high D. And so we knew how to better play off of each other and use each other's strengths to move forward, but also not annoy each other
Yeah,
by doing things that the personality type would not take well to.
for sure, for sure. And you also mentioned in your section of the book where practicing the power of pause can be quite effective and something we should consider. Sometimes it's not always words. Sometimes you just need to pause and give time to reflect or give the person time to respond.
One thing that
Yeah,
we use as well
go
is,
ahead,
and I think
Melita.
Brad is probably about to say it as well, but doesn't need to be said, doesn't need to be said by me, doesn't need to be said now. So it's, that's part of the pause,
Right.
and to allow yourself to answer the question, because sometimes I'm just not the best person to deliver the message. And sometimes I am, but the timing is not right. So it's stopping to just answer those three questions.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
and I think also, in fact, I just came out of a training session, and in the session, one of the things that was talked about was that we should um, listen more and talk less. And Melita and I both buy into that. And as we interact with each other, we have a prayer room at home that I get up a little earlier than she does, so I go in the morning and do my reading and journaling, and then she comes in later, and we'll often interact and talk about different things, and I'll leave her there, and she does her reading and journaling. But we find that to be very important to listen to each other, and that's a conscious decision that I've tried to make as a person, as a husband, a leader, a father, is listen to what people are saying, not to debate them or to respond, but to really understand what they're saying and how they feel.
And you two have definitely gone through a lot of this, but another statement you made was you had to learn how to go through it and not around it, because sometimes those tough things to talk about are really tough to do, and they can be hurtful, they can be eye-opening, and you can resent that. But if you don't do that work, you're always going around it.
That's right. One of the biggest challenges that we had was I felt betrayed. I felt betrayed by Brad when he left the company, and when he did not support me after he left the company. And us having to talk about that, it was painful for me to not talk about it, and painful for him to hear it. So for me to talk about it was harming him, and for me to not talk about it was harmful to me. And so we had to find a way to help each other heal, without harming each other. And that was part of the going through it. And it was painful, but we pushed through it. We learned to listen to one another, hear the things that we did not want to hear. As I said, I played the victim very well. I thought I'd done nothing. So it was all Brad's fault. Um, but
Yeah.
there was a lot that I had to hear about myself that was not um, easy for me to accept.
And
Yeah,
once you have those conversations and go through that healing process, then, as you say in the book too, you need to be pointed. If you're pointed towards pain all the time, then all you see is obstacles. But if you focus on the purpose, why are we doing this? How can this serve my greater purpose and help others and so on, then you can see opportunities.
yeah, for sure. And one of the things we talk about journaling, Steve, we find journaling to be a very effective activity at becoming more self-aware, but also at changing our behavior. And one of the things that I write in my journal every morning is I write, that presence is my inner purpose. And I bring that up because you talked about getting away from pain and connecting to purpose. Well, one of the things that allowed us to be able to connect to purpose is making that mind shift from pain to present. And in the present time, we're able to connect more to our conscious mind and less to our unconscious, which would have been experiences that happened in the past and may affect our behavior in the current. But by getting present, we were able to connect to purpose and fight against that.
Yeah, it's such a tough place to be, and you two did the work and got through it, and that's very inspirational. And Melita, you say later in the book too, and you talk about how when you could finally get out of, the fire drill and what's happening now and all the problems and whatever, and you could focus more on, helping others flourish and helping others grow and helping others find their purpose, then it puts you in a different mindset, as the book says, and so you can go through life looking more positively at things as opposed to just, identifying all the negatives.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because I understand now that the entire purpose of us having had that business was to be where we are now. So it was the growth and the experience. It was our journey to have, so that we could then help others, coach others as you do, to face the journey, to get through the journey, to ask the tough questions, to answer the tough questions, to find their own authenticity, to be true to that. And so that's really what we're here to do, and that's what we are dedicated to doing.
I've told this story so many times on this podcast that people that listen often probably say, "Oh, here he goes again." But I think it's so profound. I was interviewing a Navy SEAL who then became a trainer of Navy SEALs. And during Buds Week, there's an 80% failure rate of people just giving up. They can't do it any longer, so they drop. And I said, "Well, how do you know who's going to make it?" And he says, "Oh, it's easy. I can always tell. It's when the person finally decides to stop worrying about their suffering and trying to help the person next to them with their suffering, try to help them get through it. Once they make that mind shift and that jump," he says, "those are the guys that make it." And it's very similar to what you just said, right? If we can just, get out of our own way sometimes and then focus our efforts and gifts towards helping others learn and grow, that's what gives us the purpose and gets us out of the struggles we're in.
That's exactly right. I mean, to some degree, we all are in pain. That's part of life. It's challenging. Without the challenges, we don't grow. And I firmly believe if we can do just what you said, if we can all start caring about one another, helping each other, we'll all feel a lot less pain.
Yeah.
Now, did
And
you?
I think, Steve, one thing to add to that too, what I was going to add earlier, that's a great story about the Navy SEAL. But once that you can make it a habit to start pointing the finger at yourself first when you're looking for the solution to a conflict or just solving a problem, and you're not looking at other people first, you look at yourself, you go inward first. That's why we named the company Inbound Leadership, because all transformation starts with personal transformation. If you want to transform the culture of an organization or even a family, it starts with the individuals first looking at themselves and working on themselves. And then if everybody's doing that, it creates the kind of culture where you, like you said with the Navy SEALs, you care more about helping the people that are around you than on yourself, and that is also the shift in ego and going from ego imbalance to ego aware that we talk about in the book.
So now, did you sell the finance and event planning company, or is that still ongoing?
It is not ongoing. So what we did was we sold contracts. Um, and it was a gradual thing because we didn't rip the Band-Aid. And we were very fortunate to be able to sell our contracts off and to offboard in a way that worked for us.
So now you started inbound leadership. Now I got to ask the question. Did you hesitate about going into business again together?
So
Absolutely.
but you know what? We were so much more aware, and have worked through so many more of the challenges. And you talked about earlier about the fact that Malitta's more intuitive, and I'm more start from the fact side, and being able to mesh those two things together in order to achieve success, and use it as a strength as opposed to and respecting it. I respect Malitta's intuition, and I rely on it now. And so I think while we hesitated, it was still a much better union because of everything that we had learned from that whole prove it journey.
I think what you
We're
just
also
go ahead. Go
okay,
ahead.
we're also clearly more mature and wiser, as Brad said. So we're able to articulate the things that bother us with better
Yeah,
sensitivity, understanding things like disc, understanding, our sore spots. We each have sore spots, blind spots. So we have a lot of experience now in helping each other and speaking to each other in a way that's effective for the other person.
I think what you both just described there is experience. And it's people, like you said earlier, Brad, for yourself, you can read all the books and go to all the seminars and listen to the podcasts and say all the right things. But until you experience it, until you have tried it, until you failed, until you've been resilient with those failures and so on, the wisdom isn't always there. So I think what you describe now as wisdom, and as leadership coaches or executive coaches, that's something that we can teach and try and tell people, but sometimes you just have to go through it to gain that wisdom.
yeah, no doubt about it. I think, you know, also, I one thing that I learned also is that I was very defensive when Melita would give me feedback. I was very defensive, not necessarily in um, outwardly, but you can have passive aggressive behavior that is used to try to get people to not tell you the truth. And that's what I meant earlier when I talked about leaders that have egos that they're not aware of, can do things and say things that shut people down. And that's a form of defensiveness. And that's what I used to do, and what I tried to learn to do. And Melita, she wouldn't stop. She just kept coming because she knew that it was key to us getting out of that mindset prison and in the mindset freedom, that I had to really understand my blind spot. And so that's been a great experience to develop that habit to listen more and be less defensive.
While he was defensive, I was sensitive. So, I was very delicate, and he had to tiptoe about saying certain things to me. And I had to grow through that self-esteem issue that I had and overcome my sensitivity so that I could even stand to hear what he had to say. And so that was probably, I would say, the most difficult part of us coming together was those two aspects merging.
I think it's great. I read a long time ago, as both of you have as well, the Carol Dweck book on mindset. And I like how you say that though. That's very clear, and make sure I say the words right. It's mindset freedom is on the front side. On the back side is mindset. Did you say prison or mindset jail?
We refer to both, but we mostly say mindset prison.
Mindset prison, yeah. And I think that's a good way to do it because, just mindset itself isn't great if it's the wrong mindset, right? You need a
That's right.
positive
That's right.
growth, or, as Carol talks about in her book, the growth mindset
Oh yeah.
versus, you know, the hold you back mindset. So you definitely need to be aware of that and try and do things that get you into that proper framework for sure.
And when Brad talked a little bit about Prove It, how we go from left to right, the pain is on the left side, from pain to resistance, and we go through all of the challenges on the left side, getting to the freedom side on the right side, where we get present, where we release, where we begin to not see obstacles, but learn to become observers. But what's in the middle are the barriers, and they're things like being defensive, being afraid, being sensitive, and it's overcoming those things to move from the left side of the mindset prison to the right side, which is mindset freedom.
For sure. In anticipation of our discussion today, is there anything that I haven't touched on or haven't asked you about that you want to be sure and get into the program?
You've done an amazing job of touching everything. I had some notes, but I don't think there's anything untouched. So I will let Brad jump in here.
Sure. Yeah, Steve, I'd just like to, and we've touched on it, and Melita just touched on it, but this prove it methodology that we have to go through a transformation, and it can be applied again to individuals, and that's the way, Melita and I did it. But it can also be done through workshops with teams or retreats. We're preparing for a workshop now that we're going to do in a couple of weeks, where we're actually going to use this prove it methodology to address some of the more sensitive societal issues that we have these days, and we'll use two groups and tackle an issue and walk through going from pain to presence, from resistance to release, from obstacle to observation, from victim to valor, from ego imbalance to ego aware, from insecurity to inner peace, and then from tip of the iceberg to top of the mountain. And that last part, the tip of the iceberg to top of the mountain, is really about being your authentic self. A tip of the iceberg, you can only see a piece of it. You can't see what's underwater. But when you stand on a mountain, it's all visible. And that is really about authenticity and transparency, and the impact that has on individual relationships, but also on culture of organizations.
So in the workshop, we are presenting opposing views. And the point is that each view is experiencing some level of pain, and taking each view through the prove it process to create a unified vision. Because it's really about coming together and addressing the needs of what each group might need to have or experience. But we're never going to be able to do that in any situation, whether it's a home situation, a community situation, a corporate situation, never come to a peaceful middle that is a balanced existence if we don't learn to do that.
Wow, we really need that in this world we live in right now, don't we?
Yes, we
It's
do. We
You
do.
know,
it's
Steve,
polarized.
we to Melita's point, we have so much more in common than we do. We're so much more alike than we are different. That if we can focus on the alike part, the part where we want the same things, then the unity and the harmony, that's the sweet spot for it.
Is that what you're doing mostly now? Are you working with groups and seminars and workshops and things like that, or are you coaching individual people?
More seminars and workshops.
Yeah, okay, great. So at this time in the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question. And that question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today? Melita, you want to go first?
I'll go first. I say the priority is to lead yourself, to concern yourself with leading your own life, your own values, your own beliefs, and the rest will follow.
Okay, great. Brad?
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep it simple, Steve. I've talked about ego a lot, but I'll say ego is the enemy. But what I'll say along with that is that you can actually make it a strength if you can be self-aware about it, vulnerable about it, and bring it in balance. You then take those that you lead and interact with, make them feel psychologically safe, and put them in a position where they want to engage and collaborate to move towards a common vision.
Well said. Well, this has been a pleasure, you two. The book is fantastic. It's well done. It had my attention for sure. Your story is amazing, and I just want to celebrate you two for hanging in there, doing what you did in business, but more importantly, with your marriage and your union, because it certainly had its stresses and certainly had its mountains to climb. But it seems like you've got there and are doing well. So thanks for sharing your struggles with us because that helps us all learn. So great job on the
Thank you,
book.
Steve. That means a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, it's been great talking to you, and maybe we'll see you down the road one of these days.
Yep.
Wonderful.
Forward to it.
Okay, take care. Bye bye now.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.